Alright guys, happy Friday yet again. Now we've had quite a journey retrospecting some of these Friday movies, and as you can see, we haven't really gone in order. But the truth is, I never watched the movies in order. If you've been keeping score with the previous Friday videos we've been doing, you'll know I kind of watched the movies in the order of when I bought them. See, back when those deluxe DVDs came out, I can't emphasize enough just how popular they were. They would show up on a Tuesday at one of my FYEs, and by Thursday or Friday when I can get there, they would be gone. It was a magical time, but it made me really feel like I was a part of something. I knew Friday the 13th was going to be something that was going to stick with me for years to come. I just didn't realize how important it was going to be to me. It's become one of the most important horror franchises ever, or just one of the most important movie franchises to me at all time. It's basically a part of my DNA. And if you're watching this video, I dare say it's probably a part of yours as well. So there's a few more we have left to do in this series, but today we're talking about Friday the 13th, the final chapter. From 1984. And of course, this one starts out the same way the rest of them start out, but there was something that got me really excited. So of course, one faithful weekend, we're making our way back to FYE. I needed one more Friday the 13th movie on DVD. It had eluded me this whole time. Every time I would go, I would never see it. Finally, I go to FYE, and one of the workers who had been talking to me about each Friday as I was getting them finally said, "Hey, if you want final chapter, I held one for you." It was a really cool moment because that one I never would see at the store. So sure enough, I get the DVD, he hands it to me, I look it over, and I'm getting ready to check out. And my ignorance really showed at the time, but the guy behind the counter was really cool. He didn't give me any grief. I basically said to him, "So what happens after Manhattan because he turned into a kid?" And he goes, "Oh, no. This is not part 9. Then it dawned on me right as I asked the question how silly it was because I know I had seen 1 through 8, but I hadn't seen a part 4. I guess maybe I just forgot considering I saw 7 other movies, but he was like, "Yeah, this is part 4. They just didn't call it that." But I'll never forget, after I checked the movie out, me and my brother were getting ready to go, and he stopped me and he goes, "Hey, this is the best one of the franchise." No, those were almost fighting words to me at that point because I had fallen in love with movies like part 7, part 2. I mean, I really love some of those. So for him to say this is the best one really took me back. And something I'll never forget is on the way home, I just pulled out the DVD out of the bag and I started perusing it, looking on the front, looking on the back, and I can tell there was something different about this Friday movie. There was something that almost seemed a little bit darker. Just from the front cover of the movie, it was this hockey mask covered in blood. There was this knife going through one of the eye holes. Was this the final chapter for real? Of course, the series went on, but what did they mean by this? It was one of the longest car rides ever because as soon as I got home, I was so excited to pop this movie on. I didn't know what to expect. The series had gone in so many directions before and after that I was thinking to myself, how is this one going to really level up to some of the other ones that I've absolutely fallen in love with? Well, I was about to find out just what the final chapter had to offer. Now, my brother did watch this one with me, and one of the first things that we really noticed that took us by surprise was Crispin Glover being in this movie. Now, we had seen Back to the Future growing up, and we loved Crispin Glover. He was one of our favorite characters. He was one of those actors that, I just knew him from that. I hadn't dove into a lot of movies where I had seen Crispin before, but as the movie started progressing, I started realizing I really relate to him. When he's in the backseat of the car talking to his friend Ted, he's really gun-shy about women and not sure what he's doing wrong. Now, a lot of guys can probably relate to being shy around women. It's something that a lot of us probably deal with but don't talk about too much. We'd like to think we're all like Teddy and we have the answers to everything, but I think a lot of guys would probably relate to Crispin's character in that movie. I should mention what really is great about the opening is it recaps all 3 movie, setting the tone to let you know, hey, you've gotten this far, but this is the main event of the series. Until this very day, that's something I still feel about the Friday the 13th franchise, is that the final chapter is in a lot of ways the main event. And I also don't think that the final chapter is necessarily a misleading title. But more on that later. One of the things in part 4 that I was super excited about watching was the sense that we're going to see Jason Voorhees' body in this morgue. But my question was, how was he going to come back to life? Surely the events of part 3 would have killed him. As I sat there watching the movie, there was this one scene that I'll never forget that just really struck me as weird, but somehow extremely interesting at the same time. It's when that creepy guy who works in the morgue is drinking some sort of tea or coffee, and he's watching this weird workout video, but he's watching it like he's watching some kind of football game. Pretend when you're watching that movie, it's 3rd and long for some football game as he's sitting back watching. His focus is so intense, it's like he's watching a game. I love that. This was something that director Joe Zito would explain later on when I would watch the documentary after the fact, and it got me hook, line, and sinker. I kept saying to myself, how is Jason going to come back to life? He was dead at the end of part 3. He got axed in the head, and just like Joe Zito intended for the audience, I kept saying to myself, just get up, Jason. Get up. please get up. Please get up. I stopped waiting for some sort of answer, but the way Joe Zito described wanting the audience to be the author of his revival, so to speak, worked perfectly. I was sitting there begging Jason, please, man, just get up. Let's get this show on the road. Now, to say that there aren't interesting characters in the other Friday the 13th films would definitely not be true and somewhat of an insult. But when it comes to Part 4, I find myself so incredibly vested in each individual story. With Crispin's character, with his buddy Teddy, you've got the two girls, one's a little bit more promiscuous, one's a little bit more reserved. You've got Corey Feldman's character and his mom and sister. That whole arc to me is perfect. Something about when you watch Part 4 that I don't feel this way with any of the other sequels. When we're in the house with those three and they're having a good time, you kind of just want to be there with them. Everything seems so tranquil and nice. They're in this beautiful cabin. Corey Feldman's character, Tommy Jarvis, is somewhat of a nerdy kid, and clearly it was inspired after Tom Savini with the masks and things he's creating. You might be able to argue that those masks are extremely advanced for a young man. To be able to master molding and pouring and all that sort of thing would probably be somewhat hard to explain in reality. But hey, there are kids today that can play, Dragon Force solos at the age of 7, so I guess I can buy that Corey Feldman as a kid can make masks that detailed. I can't really talk about what great writing is, because quite frankly, I am not a writer. But I really want to give credit to the writer of this movie because everything not only seems so legitimate and realistic, but it also seems very natural too. It's as if these characters could legitimately truly exist, and the way that they communicate back and forth is so natural. Every response that somebody has to the other person in this film seems like something I would have said if I was in part of the conversation. And sometimes when you watch slasher films, you say to yourself, what are they saying? Who talks like that? I find that everything in this movie feels as natural as possible. And that might be one of the big reasons people look at this movie as one of the best. But it's certainly not the only reason. So up until this point, we've seen a different number of actors play Jason. We had some issues with Part 2 where Warrington Gillette played a little bit of it, and then Steve Dash played the other parts. In Part 3, we had one of the greatest, in my opinion, Richard Brooker, performing as this almost ghost-like Jason Voorhees. But Part 4 would see a performance that we would never see ever again in this sort of light. You could describe Part 3, as I said, as some sort of evil ghost-like presence, but Part 4 is almost like a wild grizzly bear performance that Ted White brings to the table. Now, he's been very vocal stating that he had no interest in really doing this job, but he probably took the job because he probably needed one at the time. Now, he claimed he watched the previous Friday movies before getting onto set, and he wanted to add something to the character. There are scenes when they're chasing Tommy and his sister in the house where they're at the top of a staircase, and Jason is not moseying up the stairs slow. He is ready to pounce, and he is fast. That is something that would absolutely horrify me. I had the chance of meeting him before he passed away at a convention, and when I say he was a monster, Ted White is probably one of the biggest Jasons. Even in his old age, you can feel his absolute presence. He was a beast. One of the scenes that is so effective to me is the bathroom scene with the guy taking the shower. Jason bursts into there and shoves his head into the tiles behind him, and it's something that is so primal. The pain you would feel with your head going back into the tiles of a bathroom is crazed. If you're going to get killed, being in the shower is probably one of the most vulnerable ways to do it. So I feel for that character. He died probably in one of the most vulnerable ways in the entire series. Now, here's a fun thing about this film that I don't know if it's a mystery or if it's really been confirmed, but we have to talk about the wild Crispin Glover dance for a second. First time watching this, I just remember laughing really hard, but for some reason, it just made total sense. That's the way I would imagine Crispin Glover would dance. But the rumor was that the song was AC/DC's Back in Black. Now, the song we hear in the movie is a song called Love is a Lie by a band called Lion, and it's a great song. I love that song to death. I've even covered it and posted it on my Patreon. It may be on YouTube as well. But I don't know if it was Back in Black. I tried to play the song while watching the scene one time to see if Crispin's dance moves kind of correlate with the riff of the song, and I couldn't really place it together, but that doesn't mean he didn't listen to Back in Black. Regardless, the dance scene is legendary, and fans, including myself, are still laughing and talking about it all these years later. Part 4 didn't come without its controversies, though. There's one scene where one of our girls in the film is out in the water where she gets killed on the boat. The weather was supposed to be really, really cold at this time, and Joe Zito had her in the water for a long period of time trying to get this scene nailed. The actress claims she got hypothermia from the scene, and the only reason she got out pretty much okay is because Ted White refused to continue filming if the girl did not get out of the water so she could get warmed up. That would have been really bad for Joe Zito. I'm sure the guy was under the gun and he needed to get things filmed in a hurry, but still, we gotta be careful with that, Joe. Now, I don't know if this is just me, but when you look at part 4, or the final chapter, there's a lot of humorous things to the film, but there is this underlying doom that is more intense than any other Friday movie in the series to me. There's always this feeling of darkness, of impending doom with the way Jason looks and performs in here that you can't really relax enough to laugh at things the way you'd probably want to in the movie. And maybe I find it even more prevalent after seeing the film for the first time, knowing how intense Ted White's Jason is, but that's something that also makes Part 4 so unique to me. I talk often about how each Friday film has its individual feel, and I still feel that way, but with Part 4, I find this to be the main event Friday the 13th film. There are Friday movies that I love to just throw on at a moment's notice if I'm just looking for a comfort movie to watch. Part 5, Part 7, even Part 8 for instance. But when it comes to Part 4, I don't watch this one that often. And it's also my favorite Friday the 13th. That may not make total sense, but what I'm getting at is, when I watch Part 4, I never want to get used to it. It is always an extremely, extremely awesome experience watching what I consider to be one of the greatest slasher films of all time. I think when you look at what the slasher genre is and kind of became, Part 4 is the culmination of everything right with the genre. I've talked about how Halloween really set the stage for the slasher genre, and then Friday the 13th created the legitimate blueprint that we would see going forward. There would be movies after Friday the 13th that would raise the stakes, do things in a more entertaining way, but when you look at the slasher genre as a whole, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is extremely high up on that food chain. It's not every day that an actor can claim how much they did not want to be there and how much they hated the idea of doing this role could actually help their performance. But with Ted White expressing his displeasure with not only being Jason, but being in the makeup, that angst and anger showed off so extremely well in the film, making his Jason one of the most scary Jasons in the entire series. This has got to be one of, if not the greatest Jason performances of all time. So after watching Part 4 for the first time that one fateful night, I couldn't think of a better way to end watching the Paramount Fridays. It was one of the greatest slasher movies I had ever seen at that point, and still remains to be one of the greatest I've ever seen. It's a movie that, like I said, I don't want to watch too often. I never want to get used to it. But I want to comment on the final chapter like I mentioned earlier. I don't think it's that much of a misleading title. You know, this really was the demise of Jason Voorhees. The Jason we would see after this is a undead Jason. It is the final chapter. It's almost a different book when we would see Jason return in Part 6. And when I talk about the Friday movies to people, I don't like to say Friday the 13th Part 4. I like to say Friday the 13th, the final chapter. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to know your thoughts on the final chapter. I couldn't imagine how intense this movie probably was in the theater if you were able to see it. But when it comes down to it, guys, and I look at the Friday the 13th franchise, pound for pound, I think this is one of the greatest of all time. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, is a main event movie. See you guys next time. Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.